Hey everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to a quieter, stranger corner of history. Somewhere between flickering torchlight and the faint smell of damp stone, we'll spend a gentle evening with people who, by profession, were feared, avoided, and whispered about. Yes, we're talking about executioners. Not the dramatic horror story kind, but the human, oddly mundane kind. So, dim the lights, settle in, let your shoulders relax. We're going to explore the softer side of a profession that history tends to treat as utterly terrifying. Executioners, you see, had lives. Surprising, I know. They ate, slept, drank, and occasionally danced, much like anyone else. Yet their work left a peculiar mark, socially and economically, shaping how they lived, whom they married, and even what hobbies they pursued. Because, of course, they were never just regular citizens. In medieval Europe, an executioner was officially a member of the local community, but in the same breath, a kind of professional outcast. They were essential, yes, and indispensable, but they carried the burden of a job that everyone else desperately hoped they would never have to witness. Some executioners, particularly in France and the Holy Roman Empire, inherited the role. Fathers passed axes and hoods to sons, along with the tacit understanding that polite society would avoid them at all costs. And yet, what did these men do when no one was being beheaded that day? Well, they gardened, they fished, they mended nets or repaired tools. Many ran small side businesses, often in trades that benefited from the peculiar social leeway granted by their profession. Leather making, for instance, was popular. Ironworking, too. They had practical skills that kept them busy and made them quietly wealthy, if only just enough to avoid resentment from neighbors. It might surprise you to learn that executioners were often surprisingly cultured. Some were literate. Some could read Latin, the language of law and instruction. They maintained accounts, wrote letters, and occasionally dabbled in music. Because of course they did. Even the man who swung an axe could appreciate a lute, at least in moderation. And yet, their social life was always peculiar. At weddings, executioners might attend, but never dance with the bride. At markets, they might buy groceries, but neighbors watched with cautious respect or mild fear. They were allowed to mingle, but never too closely. Always a slight distance, a whispered acknowledgement. Let's drift over to a specific example. Francois, executioner of Lyon, mid-15th century. Francois had inherited the office from his father. He was tall, a little gangly, and had an unfortunate habit of sneezing loudly during executions. The townspeople tolerated him because he did his job efficiently, but they also crossed the street when they saw him coming. In his downtime, Francois gardened. He cultivated a small plot of herbs and vegetables behind his house. Sometimes he grew flowers, daffodils and lilies, to soften the grim impression of his profession. Neighbors didn't visit often, but occasionally someone would request a sprig of rosemary for cooking, and Francois, gentle and methodical, would oblige.
He also made leather gloves and belts, which he sold in the market. This allowed him to maintain a small, dignified income. And, intriguingly, it gave him a way to meet potential brides. Marriage for executioners was a complicated affair. Many women refused outright. Some agreed only with substantial dowries. And yet Francois married twice, quietly, and had a small family that he raised behind his stone walls. Executioners had a strange relationship with law enforcement and the judiciary. Some served as constables. Some acted as mediators in disputes, perhaps because no one else wanted to be involved in minor punishments or arrests. It's not what you think of when you imagine swinging an axe at dawn, but law and order needed the expertise of someone who understood consequences very literally. And then there were hobbies. Yes, hobbies. Executioners were known to practice calligraphy, make small sculptures, and even write poetry. Not gruesome poetry, not lamenting heads and gallows, simple verses about seasons, harvests, and occasionally moral reflections on life and justice. The most surprising thing, perhaps, is how normal they could be. A profession so central to fear and power did not always consume their private identities. They laughed. They argued over dinner. They scolded children. They might sing quietly while repairing armor or mending nets. Let's consider medieval London, early 15th century. The executioner there, known only as William, had one of the busiest jobs in the city. Yet his evenings were calm. He had a small garden tucked behind his modest house. He played a simple lute. He had a cat. He wrote letters to distant relatives. When the king or mayor summoned him, he performed his duties without complaint. But on a Tuesday or a Thursday, or any day when the gallows sat empty, William lived like a man who enjoyed small comforts and small routines. He drank ale. He visited his neighbors cautiously. He traded goods. And sometimes he laughed. Quietly. Very quietly. The life of an executioner was also marked by financial opportunity. Because few would challenge them directly, executioners could buy and sell property in ways others could not. They sometimes acted as moneylenders. They sometimes leased land. And because their work was essential, their income, while socially tainted, was often surprisingly stable. Of course, they faced dangers. A poorly executed hanging or botched beheading could provoke outrage. Crowds might jeer. Officials could investigate. And there were occasional instances of revenge, though rare. Yet for the most part, routine life was calm. Oddly calm. Almost soothing in a strange, grim way.
Now let's drift to southern Germany, 16th century. Executioners there often traveled between towns, performing duties as needed. Between assignments, they stayed in small guest houses or inns, sometimes invited to share meals with the local officials. They brought with them a peculiar combination of fear and respect. People did not ignore them entirely, they could not, but they never relaxed around them fully. Hobbies, then, were essential. Knitting, carving small wooden figures, sharpening knives in elaborate ways that were more artistic than practical. Even embroidery was not uncommon, because naturally they made it all seem very elegant. Some executioners had nicknames, often reflecting either physical quirks or the tools of their trade. The long axe of Nuremberg, the silent blade of Strasbourg, the gentle hatchet of Vienna. These names were whispered, never shouted. A reminder that even fear could have nuance. By the late medieval period, some executioners had entire dynasties. Fathers trained sons, sons trained sons. A family might serve a city for generations. They kept meticulous notes on methods, weights, and ropes, much like guilds preserved craft knowledge. Yet each executioner lived with the quiet, pervasive awareness that society regarded them with suspicion. Even their clothing reflected their dual nature. Functional leathers and hoods for the job. Simple, muted colors in daily life. Sometimes subtle gilded details in leatherwork, demonstrating skill, not ostentation. So, when thinking about executioners, remember, they were humans first, axe swingers second. They sang softly. They wrote letters. They gardened. They maintained households. And when duty called, they performed their grim tasks with remarkable composure. The story of their downtime is oddly soothing. It reminds us that even the most feared professions involve quiet, everyday life, and that human routines persist no matter how dark the work may seem from a distance.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's settle in again, letting the soft hum of the evening ease our minds. We're continuing with the surprisingly mundane, yet oddly comforting lives of medieval executioners. Those who wielded axes and hammers by day and lived quiet, surprisingly normal lives the rest of the time. Executioners, as we began exploring, were craftsmen as much as they were enforcers of the law. The axe and the rope were tools of their trade, yes, but so were chisels, knives, and leather needles. Some executioners became well-regarded smiths or leatherworkers. They repaired armor. They crafted belts and pouches. They even made decorative items for local churches. Small, intricate carvings or leather-bound hymnals. Because, naturally, someone had to do it, and executioners had steady hands. Take Hans of Strasbourg, for example. Hans was a tall man with broad shoulders, a permanent crease of weariness across his brow, and surprisingly delicate hands. When he wasn't supervising the gallows, he made gloves, fine leather gloves, the kind that might be worn by a scribe or a minor noble. He sold them quietly at market, earning a modest income without ever asking for attention. Hans also dabbled in carpentry. He carved small wooden toys for children, carefully painted in muted colors. This was always done discreetly, naturally, so as not to scandalize the townspeople. Children liked the toys. Parents were cautious but tolerated them because Hans' reputation as a craftsman grew alongside his reputation as the man who sometimes ended lives professionally and sometimes mended them in wood. Social interactions were delicate. Executioners were neighbors, friends, and occasional patrons of local taverns, but they always maintained a subtle distance. No one wanted to admit friendship openly. It was safer, after all, to respect boundaries and avoid the awkwardness of proximity. Marriage and family life were particularly tricky. A woman agreeing to marry an executioner faced mixed reactions from her family. Some families saw stability, steady income, a defined role, and connections with local officials. Others recoiled at the association with death. Yet, over time, many executioners married quietly, raising children with the same mix of fear, admiration, and avoidance that colored their own childhoods. Children of executioners often learned the trade from their fathers, but they also grew up with very normal routines: fetching water, feeding animals, sweeping the house. Playgrounds were rare, but games were adapted. A stick could become a sword, a board a gallows. And yet, it was always a game, always safe within the household walls. Some executioners had a gentle obsession with hygiene. Not because they were squeamish about their work, it was impossible to be entirely squeamish, but because being clean helped manage fear. Clean hands, clean clothes, clean tools. It was partly practicality, partly superstition, and partly a quiet protest against the grimness of their daily lives. Others pursued intellectual hobbies.
Some could read Latin and French. Some dabbled in law, learning the technicalities of punishment and precedent. A well-informed executioner could negotiate not only the timing of their duties, but also subtle benefits from their employers. It was less about rebellion and more about efficiency and long-term survival. In northern Germany, 15th century, executioners often traveled between towns. When not performing a duty, they might stay in inns or guest houses, quietly participating in local markets. They were outsiders in many ways, but their skill was indispensable. They carried authority and social weight, even if it came tinged with fear. Some executioners were collectors of curiosities, bones, tools, strange insects preserved in jars. These were often displayed privately, not macabre displays for amusement, but personal catalogs of observation, a reflection of their curiosity about life, death, and the fragile boundary between. It was a quiet, introspective pastime, far from the eyes of the townspeople.
Hobbies often reflected the executioner's careful balance between their grim public role and private humanity. Cooking, for instance, became an art form for many. They cultivated herbs, they baked bread, they preserved fruits, and sometimes they shared meals with neighbors cautiously, ensuring that food was delicious enough to win small respect without inviting unwanted familiarity. And let's not forget music. Yes, music. Some executioners played flutes, lutes, or small drums, soft tunes, meditative melodies. Not celebratory fanfare, not ominous chords, just quiet music to pass the long evenings. A simple human indulgence, oddly comforting when you imagine the stone walls and the faint scent of candle wax. Executioners were also pragmatic in ways that history tends to overlook. They learned diplomacy. They understood risk. They navigated the townspeople's fear while maintaining authority. They were clever negotiators, ensuring payment, arranging schedules, and sometimes even mediating disputes. In France, executioners occasionally doubled as town officials of a minor kind. They might oversee punishments that were less lethal: fines, public shaming, temporary imprisonment. They could be called upon to arbitrate conflicts when other mediators were unavailable. It was all part of the strange balance of fear, necessity, and social acceptance that defined their lives. Let's drift now to the quieter moments of their evenings. After the market, after the workshop, after the garden, executioners returned to their homes. They dined with family. They read. They wrote letters. They might play chess quietly with a spouse or child. Perhaps a simple game of strategy, mirroring the tactical calculations of their professional life, but harmless, contained, human. Some wrote memoirs, though rarely for public consumption. These notes recorded methods, schedules, and small reflections about life and mortality. It was not morbid obsession, but rather practical reflection. And occasionally, small poetry about the seasons, the harvest, or the distant hope of peace.
Traveling executioners had similar routines. In small inns along trade routes, they were tolerated guests. Innkeepers knew to provide rooms that allowed privacy, meals that were plain but sufficient, and interactions that were polite but minimal. They were never fully integrated, but they were never unwelcome either. It was a delicate balance, a life negotiated quietly, one day at a time. As we drift toward the late medieval period, executioners became slightly more institutionalized. Guilds formed, recording procedures, tools, and apprenticeships. Knowledge was passed carefully, maintaining professional standards. Yet their social awkwardness remained. invited to local events, but never seated at the main table, acknowledged but not embraced. Some executioners even had small personal libraries, books on law, morality, agriculture, or poetry, carefully hidden from public view. This quiet accumulation of knowledge, skill, and culture was another way they asserted dignity in a life dominated by fear and necessity. And still, their leisure often reflected simple pleasures: gardens, crafts, music, family dinners, walking quietly along town walls or riversides, even collecting small trinkets or curiosities, perhaps a polished stone, a carved figure, a dried flower, brought gentle satisfaction. It's oddly comforting to imagine that the very people who performed society's most feared tasks also found solace in ordinary human activities, a reminder that life, even at its darkest edges, contains small, enduring sparks of normalcy. By now, you can imagine executioners in their quiet moments, reading by candlelight, mending leather, tuning a lute, tending to a garden, eating slowly, carefully, quietly, human, soft, surprisingly ordinary. And when duty called again, when the town summoned them, they returned to their grim work with practiced composure. But between those moments, they lived quietly, carefully, and in some cases, quite contentedly.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's settle again, letting the soft quiet of the evening wrap around us like a warm cloak. We are continuing our slow drift through the oddly human, surprisingly gentle lives of medieval executioners. By this point, we can see that executioners were far more than their profession suggested. They were artisans, they were neighbors, and, surprisingly, they were sometimes artists and poets. Because, naturally, human beings seek beauty even when their days are filled with grim necessity. Some executioners carved small wooden figures, simple carvings of animals, birds perched on tiny branches, dogs in mid-run, cats stretching lazily. These carvings were often gifts for neighbors or children, offered quietly and without ceremony. They were not meant to impress. They were small gestures of kindness, bridging the gap between fear and humanity. Others took to poetry, not the dark, morbid kind as you might expect, not lamenting heads and gallows, but verses about seasons, about harvests, about birdsong and rain. Some executioners even kept small journals with sketches alongside poems. It was a private, reflective practice, a way to organize thoughts, emotions, and occasional musings on mortality. And in that quiet reflection, they preserved their humanity. Take Jakob, executioner of Augsburg. Jakob spent afternoons carving wooden toys and evenings composing short verses. He sometimes read them aloud to his children, who giggled and copied the rhymes imperfectly. His neighbors knew little about it, but a few whispered of the strange, gentle man who wielded an axe by day and a quill by night. Executioners were also quietly mischievous in their downtime, not cruelly, but playfully. Some would leave small cryptic notes in town markets, a carved animal here, a clever rhyme there, perhaps a mild prank, switching labels on vegetables, or leaving a humorous tally of tradespeople's missed deliveries. Always subtle, never harmful. It was their way of engaging with a community that both feared and depended on them.
Traveling executioners had similar habits. When journeying between towns, they often stayed in inns, bringing with them tools, curiosities, and small amusements. A carved wooden horse on the counter, a neatly written rhyme tucked into a guest book. Quiet humor in the margins of life. They observed towns with a combination of professional detachment and human curiosity. Many executioners cultivated skills that were not only practical, but also aesthetic. Leather work, for instance, became a medium of subtle expression. Belts, pouches, gloves, each with carefully tooled patterns. Sometimes floral motifs, sometimes simple geometric designs, and always crafted with precision, patience, and care. Similarly, ironwork could be decorative as well as functional. Hooks, nails, and gates were made with artistry. Small flourishes of curls and spirals, gilded accents in some cases, revealed pride in work and a quiet insistence on dignity. Let's pause for a moment and imagine a day in the life of an executioner in late 16th century Nuremberg. Morning, tending a small garden, pruning herbs and vegetables. Late morning, visiting the blacksmith or leatherworker, exchanging tools or finished goods. Noon, quiet lunch at home, sharing bread and cheese with family. Afternoon, carving a small wooden toy or polishing a belt. Evening, composing a short poem, humming softly, listening to the distant clatter of town life. And somewhere, in between, the duties of the profession might call. An errand to inspect gallows, a summons to perform a public execution. But between those moments, a surprisingly gentle routine persisted. Hobbies often became a point of personal pride. Some executioners created miniature gardens behind their houses, miniature ponds, tiny bridges, small benches, crafted not for show, but for personal pleasure. Perhaps a child would play nearby. Perhaps a spouse would enjoy the tranquility. In these quiet spaces, the shadow of the profession seemed to lift slightly. Others engaged in scholarly pursuits, books on law, treatises on agriculture, even medical texts likely inspired by the knowledge required to judge life and death. Some executioners kept notebooks detailing herbal remedies. A practical hobby, yes, but also a subtle act of care for neighbors and family. And then there were letters and correspondence. Executioners wrote to distant relatives, other executioners, and occasionally town officials. Some letters were strictly business, confirming payment, scheduling duties, or discussing local regulations. Others were surprisingly personal. Notes about children, the weather, or the progress of a small craft project. The duality of their lives emerges clearly here. Fearsome professional, quietly human correspondent.
Some executioners even experimented with small-scale humor in their craft. Carved figures sometimes depicted animals in mildly humorous postures. Leatherwork might have hidden patterns only visible to the wearer. Tools could be decorated subtly, a small flourish that made the daily grind slightly more bearable. It's easy to imagine neighbors noticing these quirks, perhaps with suspicion at first, perhaps with a quiet smile later. Even fear has room for appreciation of skill and humor. Religious practice was another outlet. Executioners attended church, quietly participating in services. Some even donated small items to the church, carved crosses, a leather-bound hymnal, or a tidy garden plot for flowers. Participation was cautious, but sincere. It provided structure, social inclusion, and a gentle moral framework for lives that straddled the line between community service and social exile.
By the 17th century, some executioners became well-known cultural figures. Their names whispered in the marketplace, their skills admired quietly, their artistry, poetry, and subtle humor recognized by a few discerning townspeople. And yet, the social distance remained. It was always a delicate balance, a slow negotiation between fear, necessity, and quiet respect. We can imagine then that evenings were filled with quiet reflection, a small fire, a lute strummed softly, carvings polished, poems read aloud to a child, bread baked, herbs pruned. These were ordinary, human acts performed by people whose work demanded extraordinary detachment. Even the most feared profession contained spaces of gentleness, creativity, and subtle joy. A reminder that history is never just its headlines. It is the quiet moments, the mundane rituals, and the small acts of kindness tucked between larger events. As we drift toward Part 4, we will explore stories of executioners whose downtime sometimes blurred with subtle rebellion, clever trickery, and gentle subversion. Men who lived lives quietly at odds with their fearsome reputations, carving small pleasures out of daily routines.
Welcome back. Let's once again dim the lights and allow our minds to drift softly into the peculiar lives of medieval executioners. Tonight, we'll explore how these men, so often feared, so often avoided, found small ways to bend the rules, assert control, and sometimes even gently rebel. It may surprise you to learn that executioners were not always strictly obedient. Their profession demanded precision and obedience when summoned, but between calls, cleverness and subtle autonomy were prized. Some executioners modified schedules to suit their convenience. Some delayed tasks. Some offered minor choices to townspeople under their supervision, softening punishments or prolonging processes in harmless ways. Because, naturally, life was more enjoyable when you could exert even the smallest amount of control. Take Lucas, executioner of Vienna, for example. He once delayed a particularly unpleasant duty by claiming that the ropes needed polishing and the block required sanding. Days passed, people grumbled quietly, and Lucas spent the afternoons quietly reading, carving, and perhaps humming to himself. No one could openly challenge him because the task remained unavoidable. He had, in effect, bought time with a polite ruse. Executioners sometimes engaged in gentle social tricks. A common one involved the subtle exaggeration of fearsome reputation. They would make a show of sharpening tools, polishing axes, or donning hoods with solemnity. Neighbors, overhearing the clatter of chains or the distant echo of practice swings, might give a respectful wide berth. Yet the executioner knew this was often theatrical. The work itself would come when necessary. Until then, the fear was suspended, like a quiet cloud drifting over a town square. Others used symbolic humor, carving small figures into tools, decorating belts with whimsical patterns, even leaving tiny notes or rhymes on town boards, cryptic enough to amuse a few without disturbing the larger populace. It was a private rebellion against the monotony and grimness of their daily profession.
Some executioners practiced subtle acts of mercy. When minor offenses were punished publicly, they sometimes delayed the timing of a stroke, allowing the condemned a few extra moments. They might, quietly, offer water to the fearful, or provide small comforts unnoticed by the crowd. Not heroic acts, mind you, but gentle, human adjustments. And then there were the traveling executioners, moving between towns in itinerant service. They encountered strangers, unfamiliar systems, and new expectations.
In these moments, discretion was essential. A sharp wit, a clever excuse, a timely gesture of politeness, and the day passed smoothly. No grand resistance, just careful, understated navigation of duties. Hobbies continued to provide subtle autonomy. A leather worker could choose patterns, motifs, and colors. A carver could depict animals in playful positions. Even poetry allowed small commentary on town life, human behavior, and the oddities of society, hidden in plain sight within couplets. Imagine Herman, executioner of Cologne, who wrote short rhymes about local events. These were never malicious, never accusatory. Instead, they hinted at humor, irony, or moral lessons. The townspeople, if they noticed, often chuckled quietly. They understood that these notes were a small rebellion against monotony, a gentle assertion of intellect and personality. Executioners also managed family dynamics cleverly. Their children were taught to be careful, polite, and observant. At the same time, they learned subtle lessons in negotiation and discretion, how to speak cautiously, how to gauge a person's temper, how to navigate fear and respect simultaneously. It was a quiet inheritance of social skill, passed down alongside axes and hoods. Marriage offered further opportunities for subtle subversion. Wives often acted as buffers. They negotiated social interactions, smoothed over minor offenses, and sometimes shielded their husbands from gossip or scrutiny. It was a delicate balance of fear, respect, and private influence. Some executioners also engaged in cultural observation. They noted festivals, fairs, and markets with an outsider's sharp attention. They saw patterns in human behavior. They observed greed, pride, folly, and kindness alike. And sometimes they quietly adjusted their behavior, or even the timing of duties based on these observations. A human strategy wrapped in calm, understated subtlety.
Now, let's drift to northern Italy, where executioners sometimes interacted with wealthy patrons. They were asked to provide demonstrations of skill, often during ceremonial events. It might involve rope work, mock exercises, or precisely timed displays. Some executioners took liberties in these demonstrations, subtle flourishes that impressed the audience while giving themselves small breathing room from routine stress. A minor act of artistry disguised as professional necessity. Traveling executioners in France occasionally used their mobility to explore curiosity. In quiet towns, they collected small objects: a curious rock, a carved piece of wood, a feather from a local bird. These items were not intended as trophies. They were companions to solitary reflection, tokens of moments outside the rigid structure of their professional identity. Some executioners maintained small secret workshops, accessible only to family or trusted apprentices. Here, they carved, wrote, or practiced subtle humor. It was private, safe, and occasionally mischievous. A quiet assertion that even the feared could cultivate creativity. Social observation was another subtle rebellion. Executioners noticed hypocrisy, injustice, and human folly. They rarely intervened overtly, but their private reflections, poems, carvings, and letters recorded small judgments on society. It was quiet, intellectual resistance. No confrontation, no chaos, just mindful observation. Even simple routines became tools of subtle subversion. Gardens were tended in ways that defied convention. Workshops were arranged for maximum comfort. Meals were cooked with care and occasional humor. Neighbors might witness an oddly placed carving or
hear a quietly hummed tune, and the executioner remained a figure of both fear and understated humanity. By the end of the 17th century, executioners had cultivated a complex dual identity: professionally fearsome, socially cautious, privately creative. Their lives were a delicate dance between obligation and autonomy, visibility and invisibility, ritual and private pleasure. And yet, all this subtle rebellion, quiet acts of humor, artistry, and discretion served a practical purpose. It made the weight of their work bearable. It preserved dignity in the face of social isolation. It allowed human warmth and creativity to persist alongside necessity and fear.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's once again sink into the quiet of evening, letting our thoughts float gently among the lives of medieval executioners. Tonight, we explore how these men, often feared and shunned, quietly shaped their communities, families, and the culture around them. Executioners, despite their grim profession, often became unexpected pillars of local society. Their position, though feared, required knowledge of law, order, and procedure. They understood human behavior, risk, and consequence better than most, and towns learned to depend on them in subtle, practical ways. In medieval Germany, executioners sometimes acted as arbiters in local disputes. Neighbors might consult them before escalating disagreements. A theft, a quarrel over land, a disagreement in the marketplace. The executioner, with quiet authority, could offer advice or mediate a solution. Not officially, but in practice, they became advisors. This authority extended to training apprentices. Young men or family members learning the trade absorbed not just technical skill, but social navigation. How to assert authority without provoking unnecessary conflict. How to manage fear, respect, and occasional admiration. How to remain human while performing a role that demanded detachment. Some executioners also contributed to economic life. They ran small workshops, sold leather goods, repaired tools, and even acted as informal moneylenders. Their income, though derived from a socially peculiar profession, provided stability. It also allowed them to support families, apprentices, and occasionally charitable acts. Because, naturally, no one else would voluntarily lend money to a feared outsider. Take Christoph, executioner of Nuremberg, as an example. He inherited the office from his father, but diversified his work. He mended farm tools. He crafted belts and gloves. He occasionally sold firewood. And all of this quietly reinforced the local economy, even if no one admitted admiration openly. Executioners also engaged in cultural and artistic activities that benefited communities. Their carved wooden figures sometimes decorated churches, public halls, or private homes. Their poetry occasionally circulated among trusted friends. Some were known to assist in local festivals, helping with logistics or ceremonial duties. In each case, their contribution was subtle, understated, but undeniably present.
Family life remained a central focus. Executioners often cultivated strong domestic stability. Spouses played key roles, mediating social interactions and managing households. Children learned practical skills and social awareness alongside formal education. Despite their professional isolation, executioners could maintain a warm, structured, and predictable domestic environment. Even minor acts of generosity, giving food to neighbors, offering advice, or helping repair fences, enhanced their community standing. Fear persisted, of course, but it was tempered by familiarity and practical benefit. Religious practice continued to shape lives. Executioners attended church, participated in rituals, and sometimes donated items, wood carvings, candles, or small financial contributions. Participation was cautious but sincere. It allowed social inclusion and offered moral guidance. Even in a profession that operated at the edge of societal comfort, faith created pockets of normalcy and shared ritual. Traveling executioners had similar quiet influence in the towns they visited. They observed, advised, and occasionally participated in local commerce. A well-timed word of caution or advice could prevent conflict. A careful demonstration of skill could inspire awe and respect. And small acts of courtesy, allowing a child to play nearby, sharing bread with the poor, humanized a figure otherwise shrouded in fear. Executioners often maintained private creative outlets, which indirectly influenced community aesthetics. Carved door handles, patterned belts, wooden toys, and minor decorative items spread quietly through towns. These subtle contributions reflected taste, skill, and a gentle desire to participate in communal life. It was artistry without fanfare, contribution without expectation. Some executioners even became sources of local knowledge. They knew the timing of events, the habits of townspeople, and the rhythm of life. Traveling executioners collected and shared practical knowledge from agricultural cycles to minor trade secrets. They were repositories of civic memory, quietly observing what others overlooked. In France, executioners sometimes assisted in minor legal inquiries, providing testimony or advice. Their insight, derived from experience, was valued, even if grudgingly. Communities depended on them, whether openly acknowledged or not. The duality of their existence, feared public figure, gentle private citizen, allowed executioners to influence society without overt authority. They could shape behavior, mediate disputes, and cultivate subtle social norms. And all of this happened while maintaining a professional detachment necessary for survival. Even in leisure, their influence persisted. Gardens offered beauty, inspiration, and practical herbs. Workshops produced useful goods for neighbors. Carved figures and poetry enriched cultural life quietly. Small acts of humor, creativity, or mercy softened the edges of fear. It is remarkable, really, how ordinary these lives could be. Quiet dinners, gardening, children's laughter, letters, books, music, a rhythm of life that persisted alongside one of history's most feared professions. And yet, the professional side never disappeared. Executioners remained ready. The axe, the rope, the block, ever-present tools. Duty could call at any hour, and they responded with efficiency and composure. But in the spaces between, life was quietly human, quietly ordinary.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's settle once more, allowing the evening to drift slowly around us, soft and warm. Tonight, we explore how executioners navigated the precarious web of authority, influence, and law. They were, after all, the only ones entrusted with life and death in the streets, yet often socially isolated, reliant on subtlety rather than overt power. Executioners' relationships with royalty and officials were delicate. Kings and lords relied on their skill, but often viewed them with a mixture of fear, suspicion, and grudging respect. A noble might summon the executioner for a public punishment, only to offer a bribe, a gift, or a polite word of caution in private. Executioners, in turn, were careful to remain impartial in appearance while quietly navigating these social currents. Take Gottlieb, executioner of Mainz. He was summoned to perform a sentence on the son of a local baron. Publicly, he executed his duty with exacting precision. Privately,
He negotiated the timing and method, ensuring the family's dignity remained intact, the baron satisfied, and the town's sensibilities preserved. It was diplomacy by way of axe and rope, a quiet professional negotiation balanced carefully between fear and civility. In some cases, executioners acted as intermediaries between rulers and townsfolk. A king might issue harsh punishments, but the executioner could temper them subtly. A sentence could be delayed. A display could be performed with dignity rather than spectacle. Even small gestures, a bowed head, careful phrasing, a pause before action, could communicate respect for life, even in a profession defined by death. Executioners also developed a remarkable understanding of law. They knew statutes, local ordinances, and the nuances of justice. Some were consulted quietly by town councils or guilds, their opinions valued for practical insight. They understood that law was both rigid and negotiable. They could act with precision, yet subtly influence outcomes. In 15th century Burgundy, an executioner named Etienne was called to oversee a public punishment involving a minor infraction. Instead of rushing, he suggested procedural adjustments, ensuring the sentence was lawful, effective, and minimally disruptive. The townspeople left satisfied, the magistrates left impressed, and Etienne returned to his private life, quietly victorious in subtle influence. Traveling executioners often needed exceptional diplomacy. They visited towns with differing rules, local politics, and social norms. A misstep could provoke unrest. A poorly timed comment could offend the wrong family. Success required observation, patience, and careful speech, and sometimes a small, clever ruse. For instance, in southern France, an itinerant executioner once used a carved figure to distract a restless crowd during a minor punishment. The figure, a simple wooden bird, caught attention just long enough to allow the sentence to proceed quietly and efficiently. A minor act, unnoticed by the wider world, but a subtle triumph of wit and timing. Executioners' understanding of human psychology was central to their subtle power. They knew fear, shame, and respect better than most. They could read expressions, anticipate reactions, and act in ways that minimized chaos. This made them invaluable not only for enforcement, but also for maintaining social order.
In medieval Italy, executioners sometimes advised magistrates on crowd control. Not officially, of course, but towns relied on their insights. How long should a crowd be assembled? Which individuals might cause trouble? Where to place a platform for maximum effect? It was soft authority, quiet influence, and professional expertise rolled into one. Even royalty occasionally deferred to executioners' judgment. A king might wish for a dramatic execution, but the executioner's experience often persuaded him to choose a less disruptive method. Sometimes this involved small negotiation, a bow, a polite word, a careful phrasing, and the king, often tired, agreed. Authority remained with the crown, but influence flowed quietly from the executioner. Some executioners became mentors and advisors within their own families. Apprentices were taught skill, discretion, and diplomacy. They learned how to handle difficult townspeople, negotiate timing, and subtly influence decisions without overstepping authority. It was a form of professional socialization that ensured continuity and stability. Even small gestures, offering advice to a child, mediating a minor quarrel, lending tools,
reinforced the executioner's position in society. Their social influence extended quietly, often without public acknowledgement. Interestingly, executioners sometimes cultivated networks of trust among other outsiders. Traveling performers, merchants, or soldiers might rely on the executioner for safe passage or discreet assistance. Executioners understood the power of information, reputation, and selective generosity. Small acts of aid strengthened social bonds and created subtle leverage. Leisure and creativity continued to play a role in their subtle influence. Carving, music, poetry, and small crafts were not merely hobbies, they could be tools of social diplomacy. A finely carved item gifted to a town official, or a humorous rhyme circulated quietly, could soften fear and build rapport. These were small, non-violent methods of asserting presence, shaping perception, and smoothing the edges of an otherwise fearful profession. By the 17th century, some executioners were integrated into municipal life more fully than outsiders might expect. They attended councils, participated in festivals, and advised officials. Their work remained grim, but their knowledge, subtle influence, and quiet diplomacy made them respected in practical terms. Yet social isolation persisted. Neighbors remained wary. Children might glance curiously but keep distance. And executioners balanced this isolation with the deep, private connections of family, apprentices, and trusted confidants.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's once again ease into the soft glow of evening, allowing our minds to drift gently into the lives of those who lived beside death, yet carried on with surprising humanity. Tonight, we explore how executioners confronted mortality, not only that of others, but their own, and how it shaped the quiet courage of daily life. It may seem obvious, but executioners were intimately acquainted with death. Publicly, they were instruments of it. Privately, they reflected on it constantly. And reflection was not morbid or dramatic. It was practical, quiet, and human. Some executioners maintained personal journals, documenting daily routines, observations, and occasionally thoughts on the transience of life. A brief note on a calm morning, a reflection on a particularly long or difficult day, a small sketch of the town from a quiet corner. These were acts of mindfulness, ways to organize thoughts and confront the realities of their profession. Take Matthias of Augsburg. He wrote small meditations. The rope sways, the birds sing, tomorrow the sun rises again. Simple sentences, unadorned, yet they capture the rhythm of life alongside the ever-present shadow of death. Facing mortality required practical routines as well. Executioners often maintained physical fitness, agility, and precision, not out of vanity, but necessity. A slip could be disastrous. A poorly executed procedure could provoke panic or legal complications. So daily exercises, lifting, swinging, sharpening, were both survival tools and subtle meditative practices. Some executioners also engaged in rituals of personal reflection, a quiet walk before dawn, a meditation on a carving or craft, moments of prayer or contemplation. These routines helped cultivate calm, reduce anxiety, and allow them to return to their professional duties with composure. Interestingly, executioners were also students of psychology,
observing fear, courage, and human reaction. They noted patterns: who panicked, who remained calm, and what gestures or words could influence outcomes. This knowledge was practical, improving efficiency and reducing chaos, but also philosophical, revealing subtle truths about human nature. In 16th century France, one executioner wrote notes on the psychological effects of public punishment. He observed that calm speech and measured actions reduced panic, that a pause, a glance, or a respectful nod could calm not just the condemned, but the crowd. A gentle manipulation of human instinct, refined through repeated observation and reflection. Facing mortality personally was no less important. Executioners often planned for their own deaths quietly and practically. Wills were prepared. Tools and workshops passed to apprentices or family members. Small instructions for the care of children or property. These acts were deliberate, understated, and deeply human. Some executioners even prepared for accidental injury. A misstep with an axe or rope could be fatal, so they trained assistants. They maintained medical knowledge, sometimes herbal remedies. They created safety routines without fanfare, acknowledging risk without dwelling on it.
Executioners also observed death outside their profession. Illness, accidents, and natural passings in their communities offered further reflection. They witnessed grief, mourning, and small rituals. And these observations reinforced a quiet understanding. Life is fragile, fleeting, and often unpredictable. Hobbies continued to provide solace. Carving, poetry, gardening, and music were acts of quiet endurance. They reminded executioners of the pleasures of life. They nurtured creativity alongside professional necessity. Even small successes, a perfectly carved bird or a line of verse, were victories in a life constantly shadowed by mortality. Family life remains central to this quiet courage. Children and spouses offered grounding, continuity, and emotional stability. A child's laughter or a spouse's gentle guidance provided balance against the grim demands of duty. Executioners cultivated these relationships carefully, aware that emotional resilience was as important as physical skill. Traveling executioners confronted mortality differently. They moved through unknown towns, unfamiliar laws, and occasionally hostile populations. Here, calm, observation, and diplomacy were paramount. A misjudgment could provoke anger, panic, or even physical harm. Survival relied on subtlety, timing, and quiet courage. Small gestures, a polite bow, careful speech, or the timing of a step could avert confrontation. These acts were unremarkable to outsiders, but required focus, presence, and a gentle mastery of circumstance. Executioners also learned to normalize death, not by becoming callous, but by integrating it into daily thought. They acknowledged mortality while continuing with ordinary life. Meals, gardening, workshops, letters, poetry, music. The rhythm of daily existence created a buffer, a space where life could continue alongside professional inevitability. Interestingly, some executioners developed philosophies about fairness and justice through repeated exposure to human mortality. They observed patterns of wrongdoing, consequences, and social reaction. Some incorporated these lessons into private writings or teachings for apprentices. These were not grand theories, but simple truths. Act with care, respect life where possible, and temper fear with reason. By the 17th century, executioners had become masters of quiet endurance. Their lives balanced danger, fear, and social isolation with artistry, creativity, diplomacy, and familial love. They confronted mortality daily and returned to small pleasures, human connections, and personal reflection. They were both hardened by their work and softened by private routines. A complex, paradoxical existence, often misunderstood, always quietly resilient.
Welcome back. Let's settle once more into the gentle rhythm of evening, allowing our thoughts to float slowly among the lives of executioners and those closest to them. Tonight, we explore how knowledge, skill, and subtle wisdom were passed from one generation to the next, quietly preserving the unique rhythm of this profession. Executioners rarely worked alone. Apprentices were essential, often family members, sons, nephews, or distant relatives. They learned not only the technical skills of the craft, but the delicate social dance that ensured survival and respect. Timing, precision, discretion, and diplomacy. These were lessons no manual could teach. A young apprentice might spend years observing before ever handling a rope or axe. The first weeks were often spent polishing tools, arranging workshops, or preparing blocks. These tasks were monotonous but foundational. They cultivated patience, attention to detail, and a quiet understanding of procedure. Family workshops were carefully structured. Children learned to carve, mend, and create decorative motifs. They practiced handwriting for official records and letters. They studied arithmetic, measurement, and occasionally rudimentary law. The work of the executioner was as much about social management as it was about the act of execution itself. Apprentices observed subtle techniques of timing and crowd management, how long to pause before a public act, how to gauge a reaction, when a nod or bow could calm tension. These were lessons of empathy wrapped in efficiency, taught quietly through repetition and careful demonstration. Some families developed secret signs or codes, passed from master to apprentice. A discreet hand gesture, a subtle word, a tool positioned in a certain way, all served as reminders of timing, discretion, and the importance of composure. This knowledge allowed executioners to coordinate tasks, avoid misunderstandings, and maintain authority without overt display. Traveling apprentices learned additional skills. They observed different customs, local laws, and ceremonial practices. They acquired adaptability, how to navigate a town unfamiliar with the nuances of their profession. Every journey was a lesson in diplomacy, observation, and quiet courage. Families also maintained emotional resilience. Children learned early that fear and respect were intertwined. They observed their elders managing crowds, handling sensitive situations, and responding to social expectations. They learned empathy alongside detachment, patience alongside efficiency.
Some executioners taught philosophical reflection to apprentices. Not grand treatises, but small thoughts. Consider fairness. Observe human nature. Balance duty with kindness when possible. These were subtle guides for moral and social navigation. Hobbies and creativity were included in training. Apprentices carved small figures, wrote short verses, or tended gardens. These acts nurtured skill, concentration, and quiet expression. They were also lessons in patience, attention to detail, and the subtle assertion of individuality within a socially constrained role. In some towns, executioners' families acted as community advisors in minor disputes. Children learned to speak with discretion,
measure words, and understand context. These skills were not only practical for survival, but reinforced the family's social integration, creating a delicate balance between fear, respect, and trust. Marriage was another site of subtle knowledge transfer. Spouses mediated social encounters, guided interactions, and sometimes advised on procedural adjustments. They were partners in professional discretion, teaching children and apprentices lessons in tact, observation, and quiet diplomacy. The continuation of the profession relied on careful succession. Masters selected apprentices not just for skill, but temperament, patience, composure, intelligence, and subtle humor. An ill-chosen apprentice could disrupt both workflow and social balance. A carefully selected one ensured smooth operation, continuity of knowledge, and preservation of the family's quiet influence. Even small rituals were part of training. The care of tools, preparation of the block, arrangement of chords, all were practiced meticulously. Apprentices learned to move deliberately, to anticipate human reaction, and to cultivate calm. It was repetition, observation, and careful mimicry that instilled confidence and competence. Some families maintained archives of subtle wisdom, carved motifs with symbolic meanings, written notes on timing, etiquette, or local law, recipes for minor remedies, poetic reflections on life, death, and community. These archives were private, transmitted from master to apprentice over decades, quietly shaping generations. Traveling apprentices gained exposure to regional variation in customs. They learned how execution practices differed, how crowds behaved, and how local authorities expected procedures to unfold. Flexibility, observation, and subtle negotiation were key lessons. They were trained to adapt without losing composure or authority. By adulthood, apprentices had mastered not only the mechanics of the profession, but the social and psychological nuances necessary for survival. They understood mortality, human behavior, and the interplay of fear, respect, and diplomacy. They were skilled artisans, careful negotiators, and quiet community contributors. In many ways, they were both feared and valued, simultaneously outsiders and essential members of society.